Welcome to the Walled Garden Podcast. Here we nourish the gardens of our minds, one meaningful conversation at a time. If you'd like to find out more, go to thewalledgarden.com. Thanks for joining us. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of the Walled Garden Podcast. So before we dive in and talk about our guests on the show today, I just want to let you know that we have a meetup coming up this week in the Walled Garden, completely free and open to everybody to attend. And it's actually with Karen Duffy. So many of you will have seen or met Karen Duffy at a few of these Stoicon conferences. A very interesting individual, a lot of wisdom to share. And I wanted to share a little bit of information about her and her new book that she's actually going to be releasing on the day that we're having a conversation with her. So that's an absolute honor, and it's going to be a pleasure to be talking with her. And every interaction that I've had with Karen up until now has really led me to believe that this is going to be a powerful conversation. And so we're going to have that initial interview like we always do, and then open it up to Q&A. So if you want to attend, I'm going to put a link in the show note to where you can register. Otherwise, just go to thewalledgarden.com/events, and we'll see you there. All right, so to today's conversation, we have a couple of people on here today. One who you've all known before, Leonidas Konstantakos, and also we have Ryan Driscoll. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about both of these gentlemen, but basically the conversation today was all around Stoicism and the military, and we go into all sorts of tangents, but really interesting stuff coming from two people who have spent time in the US military, giving their experiences as well as how the philosophy helps them to think about military service and their role. So Ryan Driscoll, he's a veteran of the US Army with multiple deployments in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. He's also a facilitator of the Nashville Stoics meetup group and also the host of the podcast Stoic Warfighters, in which he explores Stoicism as it relates to military themes through interviews with experts. Now, Leonidas Konstantakos, I'm sure many of you have heard him on the show multiple times, but otherwise, if you haven't heard him, he has a PhD in the field of Stoicism and international relations, especially in Stoic just war theory. He, along with Kai Whiting, is the co-author of Being Better, Stoicism for a World Worth Living In. So it was such a pleasure to have both of these gentlemen in with us. We had a really fascinating conversation. I'm sure that even if you have no interest in military or military service, you're going to get something out of this because these two guys have a real knowledge and understanding of Stoicism, and particularly Leo. He really drops some truth bombs on us in terms of the Stoic philosophy and theology, but also just learning from Ryan's experience as well and what he's learned so far doing his podcast. It's been it was a beautiful experience to talk to both of them. So I know you're going to enjoy this conversation, and without any further ado, I present to you Ryan Driscoll and Leonidas Konstantakos. Ryan Driscoll, he's a veteran of the US Army with multiple deployments in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. He is also a facilitator of the Nashville Stoics meetup group and the host of the podcast Stoic Warfighters, in which he explores Stoicism as it relates to military themes through interviews with experts. And then we've got Leo Konstantakos, and many of you will already know Leo because we've done an amazing series on the fundamentals of Stoicism with Leo and Kai Whiting. So Leo, he's a PhD candidate working on Stoicism and international relations, especially Stoic just war theory. He, along with Kai Whiting, is the co-author of Being Better, Stoicism for a World Worth Living In. Now, nothing's changed there, Leo. You're still a candidate. You haven't finished your PhD yet. Am I getting that right?
I'm done, Simon. So
you're done,
Dr. Konstantakos.
Wow. Doctor,
actually, so there's a few things there. So yes, please don't ever call me that. again, like Leo is fine, but also it's
all right, Doc.
Yeah, don't ask me to do anything medical. By the way, if you say that, somebody might think that I can do something medical. I haven't done that since the army.
You're a doctor of the soul. That's what you are. Okay,
I like that. I'm gonna put that on my tombstone. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and also, Konstantakos is fine. Call me whatever you want. But I'm told that when I go to Greece, that it's Konstantakos. But I don't care. Just Leo is fine.
Konstantakos.
Right, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to try and get that right.
Yeah, exactly. Just like that. Konstantakos.
Okay,
that's too easy.
Amazing. Okay, well, look, it's so great to have you here and to have both of you here. And I guess seeing as Ryan is the guest of the hour, I really want to open it up to Ryan first. Ryan, just give us a little bit of a firmer foundation to stand on in understanding you, where you're coming from, and tell us about your experience in the military, and then maybe lead up to why you decided to start the Stoic Warfighters podcast and what that experience has been like.
Okay. Well, to start, my experience in the military and in the special operations community where I came from is a little different from most people that are public about their time in the experience in special operations, because it wasn't a down the line success story. As a matter of fact, I had a pretty big failure while I was in the military, and it, in hindsight, I think was the catalyst that led me to being more introspective and moving in this direction. But to go back and give you a little backstory, I knew what I wanted to do before I joined the military. I knew I wanted to be an Army Ranger. So I got a Ranger infantry contract. And what that means is I went to basic training, I went to airborne school, I went to Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, short is RASP. And then I was put on the line. I did a couple deployments there, spent a couple of years on the line, but unbeknownst to me before I joined the military, I have this weird, I guess you call it a disability, but my inner ear doesn't work. So it wasn't until recently, actually, that I went to Vanderbilt University here in Nashville, and they said I had the lowest functioning vestibular system of anyone they'd ever seen my age. So what that means for a normal person is pretty much nothing until you get to, you're about 80 and your muscles are atrophying and you can't really stand up straight. But whenever your whole mission is hiking up mountains in Afghanistan at nighttime, carrying 70 pounds of gear and trying to do a job, it becomes a problem. So, you know, in hindsight, again, hindsight being 2020, and learning Stoicism and thinking about some of these tools and wishing I could go back and teach a younger version of myself this, there were things I think I could have done better in that situation to view the adversity differently and try and overcome the situation. But ultimately, I didn't have those tools, and I was beaten by it. So I ended up leaving the line, which was pretty catastrophic emotionally at the time, you know, to leave your unit. And then I spent the next couple of years in a support position and within Ranger Regiment. They didn't get rid of me. They kept me there. So I did a couple more deployments in that role. And then when I was getting out, I thought about going to the regular Army because their mission set isn't all night raids. So I thought, you know, maybe I could keep doing this job in a different position. And I even looked at changing my MOS, so changing my job to something like military intelligence. But ultimately, the military was downsizing because we were supposed to be getting out of Afghanistan back in 2014, or at least, you know, downsizing the troops. So whenever I called units and was like, hey, you know, you got room for me? They were like, we just got rid of a brigade, man. We don't have any room for you. So ultimately, I ended up getting out because I had a negative experience trying to re-enlist. I thought, all right, I'll try my luck somewhere else. And then the big thing that I wanted to do, because I had this chip on my shoulder and my identity was all tied up in the military, was I wanted to be a military contractor like Blackwater or something like that. Go, you know, the idea of going 6 months out of the year and making six figures and coming back and just relaxing for 6 months was a pretty appealing idea to me. But ultimately, my wife wasn't okay with me going to war just for money. So shelved that, ended up getting a normal job in construction. Some, you know, kind people throughout my civilian career have given me opportunities that I've been able to take advantage of. And, you know, whenever I got out, I dealt with a lot of issues in terms of identity and separation of tribe and things like that, that I thought were just me. And the more I talked to other veterans, I realized that I really don't think it's just me. And I think that it's actually a really common issue within the community. So whenever I found Stoicism, it helped me deal with a lot of those issues, really get over them totally. And it's had such a profound impact on my life and the life of those around me that I felt like I should do something about it. And, provided my story not being a cool guy story, I really was a little apprehensive about taking on the project because I wasn't excited to talk about failing. It's never fun to relive those memories, but I just felt like there was a calling there to where this is too useful and too applicable, especially to this community where they're dealing with extremely high stress, complex environments that are rapidly changing. And, Leo talks about it in his dissertation, but I agree with him. I think that Stoic virtue ethics are a very applicable system for a complex, dynamic environment where things are constantly changing, like in a war zone. So, I actually reached out to Leo because I think I saw him on your podcast, and I was like, hey man, is there a community out there? I think that, this is something that should happen. And he was like, no man, but you should do it. And I was like, well, that's not what I'm asking, but sure. So he pushed me to go and do that. So I started the podcast. And since then, I think I've had 6 guests. I have an episode I need to release, but it's been really interesting. I've learned a lot from these experts. And again, one of the key takeaways is I found that the things that I thought initially were unique to me leaving the military are very common experiences that aren't really talked about. I mean, in general, people talk about veteran suicide and they only talk about PTSD, which is obviously a complex and serious issue. But that isn't everything that people from the service are dealing with. So that's how I went from joining the military to sitting here talking to you today.
Yeah, I love that, man. And I appreciate how open you are with just the struggles that you went through and perhaps some of the successes and some of the failures or perceived failures. And, I want to touch on this, post-war or post-deployment anxiety that you see so much of. I heard something recently, and I don't know whether anybody here can confirm or deny this, but I'll state what I heard in order to lead into a conversation about it. It's something like they've seen 4 times as many suicides in the military as people who actually died in Afghanistan deployed. Now, I can't speak to the factual to the fact of that, but I think it points to this idea that we see so much of, which is that there's a real problem with military members coming out of war, out of deployment, and really, really suffering. And something that you mentioned there, Ryan, is that you thought that it was just you. Now, what led you to finally understand that this was something that a lot of people were going through? Did people start to reach out to you when they saw you doing the podcast? Did people start to open up about this sort of stuff?
No. So for me, it was really pre-podcast that I started forming this thesis. And then it wasn't until talking to experts that I feel like I'm pretty validated in my thinking. But so for me, I'll tell you, I don't have PTSD. So that wasn't a struggle for me. So I could rule that one out. I could check that off the list of reasons that I don't feel good after leaving the military. And the 2 big things that I dealt with that I've since learned from talking to experts are common things are a loss of tribe, because the amount of like cohesion and integrity within the tribe of being in the military is extremely strong. And it's hard to replicate outside of the military. So, I ended up hearing that a lot from public figures where there's these salty, ex-special operations guys, whatever, have a platform and they are out there, making videos about shooting or whatever. And they oftentimes talk about their struggles leaving the military. These guys are tough as nails. I mean, the toughest guys in the world. And they're talking about suicidal ideation and things like that. And one thing that stuck out to me listening to it was I didn't hear them say anything about trauma from deployments or anything about negative, mental images or PTSD. Not that wasn't a compounding factor that they didn't want to talk about. I mean, I don't know. But what they were talking about was feeling hopeless and feeling like they lost their life purpose. They didn't have the same cohesion and tribe around them. And that leads me into the second thing, which is a sense of identity. Oftentimes, people tie up their identity with the job that they have. And the military is one of those that's extremely seductive to do that, because we have a sort of hero worship around them in our culture, which I think that there's a degree of respect owed to, people that go to war for their country. But whenever you internalize that as an individual, saying that I am a soldier, or like I am this, and everything about me is this thing that I'm doing, you really set yourself up for success or for failure, because eventually you're going to have to leave that job. Or unfortunately, a lot of people leave the job after being maimed or injured in combat, and then they still have that feeling of I failed the guys, or I'm not there with them. They have that lack of tribe, but then also they have their identity tied up, and I'm a soldier, but now I'm not. Now I'm somebody who's just injured on the sidelines. And to me, again, not experiencing PTSD, it gave me, I guess it pushed me to kind of see things from my own perspective and the things that I dealt with. And so I think that is a common issue in addition to the PTSD issue. And I also think it's one of the things that people aren't talking about, where there's a lot of focus on specific trauma-related mental illness. There's not a lot of focus on prepping men and women mentally for that kind of separation, that, like cutting your sense of identity and your tribe and moving into the next phase of your life.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. And I wonder, Leo, if you wanted to comment on anything here, because I know that you've also been in deployment. And did you have a similar kind of experience, or do you know people who have had similar experiences? And perhaps what is it that gets you through that having that identity and then having it somewhat shattered when you're outside of it?
Yeah. So I had something of a different experience than Ryan. At first I was in the Coast Guard for 4 years, which much love to the Coast Guard. I got to do a lot of search and rescue and law enforcement, which I really liked. But at the end of the day, it wasn't for me. And after I got out, it was just around the time of 9/11. And I joined the Army right there, right after 9/11, thinking that I was going to go to Afghanistan, like Ryan had to go. But instead, I got sent to Iraq for 2 tours, right? Which colored my view of the military, or I should say, at least of the operation of the military in the region since then, right? So that's probably why one of the reasons that I got out afterwards. I did like a total of almost 10 years in the military and got out. But just because you expect something, and then you end up going to Iraq, which I thought, like, okay, why are we here? Why are we not in Afghanistan? But that but the point I'm trying to make is, my experience was so different from Ryan's because I was a combat medic. So when people like Ryan have to blow things up and kill people, I was the one that had to go and look at whatever's left and try to put things back together again. So I had a different experience in that sense. And that actually, I do have PTSD. And it was about three years after the war that I couldn't sleep. So I would take night jobs, and I would travel, especially around the holidays. I would travel a lot just so I wouldn't have to speak to anybody. And it wasn't until about that time where I found Stoicism myself. And that basically, like what Ryan was saying, allowed me to start thinking of myself as something other than a soldier, or what I thought a soldier should be, right? So to touch on more on what Ryan's saying, this concept of roles, right, that the Stoics talk about. So depending on which Stoic you're reading, you'll have several roles, but there's the role there that's immediate, but there's also the sense of roles like, okay, what is my human role here? What is my individual role? Right? What are my circumstantial roles? What are my career-driven goals? Now, I think that what Stoicism does so well here is that it allows you to start putting these experiences that you have under categories, and you start being able to see, okay, well, I'm not going to be a soldier forever, right? I'm not going to be a serviceman forever. So how do I now start making sense of my experiences, right? And I got to tell you, like, that kind of changed the world for me, as it did for Ryan. I think perhaps in a different way, perhaps under different circumstances. But I'll tell people that I don't know if Stoicism saved my life, but it made it worth living. So I'm very thankful for that.
Mm. Well, I do want to dive a bit deeper into the Stoicism side of both of your paths, but I guess I want to ask one question of both of you to take maybe a broader look at the systems that are currently in place to help soldiers transition out of the military and into civilian life. What do you think that organizations, the government, the military organizations, what are they doing right in their getting people out into civilian life, and what do you think that they're doing wrong? You're both on the ground, you've experienced this from different perspectives, but nonetheless you've experienced it. What do you think would be helpful for them to do as military members are transitioning out?
You mind if I jump in there, Leo?
Please.
Okay, so I've had the last two guests that I have, I feel like speak to this. The most recent one that I post was Roger Johnson Jr., who runs the vet center for the VA in Maui. And he's I think a 20-year vet or close to it, and ended up ending his career by being medevaced. So, he's experienced with the full spectrum of the military experience. And whenever he got out, he said that he had such a great experience at the vet center that he ended up going and getting his degree in clinical psychology. And now he runs the vet center in Maui. So I didn't realize that those resources were there. And I think, a lot of people stigmatize therapy and going to therapists. And the nice thing about the vet center is that it is veterans dealing with veterans. And it does kind of rekindle that community as they're working through therapy. And then the most recent person I spoke to, who I haven't put out yet, is Dr. Megan McElhern, who created a resiliency-based psychological program called Before Operational Stress, based on Stoic principles. And the idea is try and give these principles so that whenever you're introduced to stress, instead of doing what Leo and I did in very different ways in terms of dealing with stress and negative thoughts, after the fact, like coming to this and finding it, it would be providing a bulwark beforehand. So in terms of resources that are out there, I know the vet center's out there, although, again, it's stigmatizing the community to get therapy. And then in terms of things that might be helpful, I think that what Dr. McElhern is onto is a good thing. I mean, I think that there's promise there. And she's right at this point, she's got clinical evidence to back that up as well.
Mm. Yeah, awesome. And I just like what you say about trying to help people to get over that stigma of therapy. And so often I would imagine that it would just be such a huge aspect of military life to have that kind of, I can face this alone, I can do this alone, and I don't know, Leia, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that in terms of what people can do better to make the transition easier?
I got to tell you, like, my personal experience with coming back was at the Veterans Affairs Hospital. I'm talking about soldiers in the States, and my own experience as coming back as a soldier from the United States. I'm sure people have other complaints that I don't know about, but for me, the Veterans Affairs were angels, right? So like they put me through my bachelor's. Right. So I got, I mean, it has to be something that you can get a job after. So mine was an education, not philosophy, what I wanted. I had to wait for my master's to do everything I really wanted to do. But they gave me, they allowed me to get an education, allowed me to start a career, really helped me out. The Veterans Affairs was wonderful for me. Right. I certainly have no complaints about anything that happened with there. When I do have a complaint about other things that could be done is I would look at, veterans coming back is things that you usually don't think about. Well, let's just start with physical stuff. For example, dental care, right? Dental care is healthcare. And I feel like you guys from Australia are probably like, oh, of course, right? I mean, anywhere else in the world, but here, America's a whole different animal, right? So there's often things we don't think about, So I would look at things like dental care, maybe something like that. But one thing I would I would like to bring up, and this is going to veterans that are listening, is that even if you do get therapy, please remember that that therapy never stops. Like I just now, years after my last deployment, and years after even studying Stoicism for a long time, and I want to be careful here because I'm not sure what the statute of limitations is, but there's a park behind my house which I go walking in, at night. Just to kind of like wind down, and there are always like kids there, like drinking, smoking weed, whatever. But I remember one time like this, about a couple years ago, maybe like there was some disrespectful teenagers, and I just went from 0 to 100, right? Where they ended up apologizing, whatever. They wanted to leave, but as soon as I saw somebody reaching into their backpack, like I just thought like this was it. That was back in the war, and I always like carry a pocket knife with me because of open boxes or people let their dogs out or whatever, right? And back in the park. And I thought like I'm gonna kill it. And it's just afterward where I was like, oh, I almost killed a teenager, right? Like that's what happened. Like here I am practicing self-control, practicing justice, practicing courage, practicing wisdom, and here just in a split second, a couple teenagers in the park, and I'm back to like gutting someone like a pig, right? So you really, if I talk to any veterans, I don't care how much Stoicism you study, right? I don't care how much therapy you get. Please always think that you always have to check yourself. Always, please seek help. Like for example, that was a serious story. A less serious story in kind of the same vein is when I'm with an old army buddy of mine where we were in the war together. Like he'll be driving down the street and we'll see something on the side of the road, like a bag or something. And as we drive past it, I'm just like, boom, and I throw myself on top of him like it's an IED, right? And he told me something that always stuck with me. He said, "I'm no longer afraid of it, but I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where we don't think about it." Right. So it's that kind of thing where the emotions of it, you no longer assent to those impressions that something bad is happening. But I don't know if we'll ever not get the impression that it might happen, or that, memories of it happening. So I would say that, like, who's going to be a sage, right? Nobody. But even someone like when I'm most confident, and I think, look, I've been studying this for a decade and a half, philosophy in general for 2 decades or whatever. Still, like, you please, for veterans out there, especially veterans in Stoicism, don't rest on your laurels. Always see if you can talk to someone, keep rereading, keep studying, because you never know what's going to have that one moment where you're back in the middle of Afghanistan or Iraq, and you don't want that person to be you. And I remember thinking that, like, all these degrees on my mom's wall, everything I've done since, and I could be in jail over the dumbest possible thing because I mistook somebody reaching in their backpack for a phone for a gun or a knife, right? So please.
Well, it's interesting what you say there to describe that is you don't know when the moment might be when you're back in Afghanistan, implying, at least I'm interpreting this, that you're implying that it can get to the point where sometimes you literally just in that moment, you can't help but feel that you're there, it's happening, and it just takes over you. Ryan, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, sorry for coughing. I just wanted to ask Leo, do you think that with your study of Stoicism and your understanding of impressions as being something outside of your control, does it help you after the fact give yourself a little more grace there instead of going home and for the next year beating yourself up, thinking of yourself as broken? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. So the way it works,
you can't control that.
Sure. Yeah. No, I've been thinking a lot about this for years, and there's a part in, I think it's Gellius, but there's a point where, like, there's a Stoic who, like, he's in a ship, and the storm is coming and the ship is almost getting tossed and turned, and this person's like, "Aren't you a Stoic? Like, why are you turning white? Why are you like you're just as scared as everybody else is, right?" And he shows them apart from the writing the Stoic, where he's like, "Yeah, look, these are impressions. You can't help the impressions you get, right? This is like what Seneca mentioned this, we now call like propatheia, right? Is this concept of like these impressions that you get, and you're going to have bodily reactions. And in the best interpretation that I can give this for like post-traumatic stress is you're going to get these impressions where you're going to be thinking about things that are out of your control, and there's not a lot you could do about that. But what you can do, like the Stoics are saying, is kind of back away from this for a second, say, hold on, let me walk back some pressure for a bit, let me study it, and then decide to either assent to it or reject it, right? Or withhold assent. That's the way it's been working for me. Now, what I think works the best is to, when you're going to have something that's going to trigger you if you have PTSD, at least from my experience. But you can choose at least on your best day, right? On our best day, we can choose to be like, no, we're not doing this today. I'm not going to just assent to this impression right now. And once you can do that, and once you learn to do it consistently, it really does help. Or at least it helped me. Right?
Can I just add something there, Ryan, as well? One of my favorite quotes from Epictetus was where he said, the real formula, I'm paraphrasing here, but the real formula for personal growth is self-scrutiny applied with kindness. And I think that that's kind of what you're pointing to there, is that grace that you give yourself to know that I'm just a human being and I'm just trying to make progress. That's it. And that means that I'm not always going to be on my best game. And I love that. I share that with every single person I've ever worked with, and I try to drill it into them. Self-scrutiny applied with kindness. And it seems like, especially in somewhere like the military, I imagine that self-scrutiny would just be like, all the way up here, constantly at peak levels, right? But is anybody saying, okay, no, you're a human being first and a military member second? You need to have this kindness as well. Ryan, what have been some of the most helpful, I guess, Stoic precepts, ideas, concepts that have really helped you to get through some challenges, whether in the military or outside?
I'd say, I don't know. You think that'd be an easy answer for me? I mean, just really the basics are useful in terms of what's in your control and what isn't in your control. Kind of that help cleave, rumination over a lot of past experiences. And then talking to Leo a lot about role ethics was really helpful. And I mean, even when I started studying philosophy, for a while studying Stoicism and talking to Leo, I still was kind of torn. And when he brought up, who says it? The Panitas, the 4 roles. So whenever you brought that up, I was thinking, well, there is a role for job there, but it wasn't until I really accepted my first role as a human being and focusing on virtue, because it doesn't matter what job you do. Your character is completely independent of the position that you hold, as long as you're striving for virtue, not that we're achieving it. So for me, I think that would be the core idea, that virtue, or the attempt to achieve it, is, not dependent on what you're doing. And that just, freed me up from thinking that I would need to do something in the, guy with a gun world to be satisfied.
Ryan or Leo, could either of you describe that 4-role theory from Panitas? I'm not sure if I'm familiar with that.
I'll jump in here. All right, cool. Well, Cicero, right? He gives credit to Panaetius on this one. So what we're looking at here is, by the time you get to the Middle Stoics, Panaetius will discuss basically that human beings have 4 roles, right? And these roles will not, if you're doing them correctly, they will not conflict with each other. At least not supposed to, right? So you have your role as a human being. So first and foremost, you're a rational human being. That's gonna, you have to act accordingly. If you're gonna act according to nature, you're gonna act according to what is rational for a human being, right? So I know I'm kind of giving you a circular argument, but just bear with me, it'll pay off at the end. So first is rational human being, and then it's your own individual nature. Now there's look, nothing that I'm saying is not controversial, okay? There are people that all they do is study this for a living, okay? So please go read this by yourself, go get a PhD in this, and then come back and correct me, please. But from what I want to, at the minimal level possible, still there's your human role, and then after that there's your individual role. People are different, all right? And people have different interests, and people have different natures. Now, these should not, you can't just say like, well, my nature is to be a serial killer, like murdering redheads and F everyone, right? No, that's not the way it works, right? So there's the human nature first, and then your individual nature. Now, after that, there's like your circumstance, your particular circumstance. So those give you some role. I mean, look at let's look at like Ryan here, for instance, right? Ryan came back. He's a buff dude. He's, young. He's viral, but he and I could have easily have come back in a wheelchair, right? Missing every limb, or having be taken care of by our moms for the rest of our life, if that's an option at all, right? So much of it has to deal with your particular circumstances, kind of decide at least one part of what your roles are, right? Now, so there's that circumstantial role, but there's also the role for Panaitius of like what you want your career to be. And that is going to lead you in a different way than other things, right? So imagine I have the, courage at all, but what is brave for me as an educator is not what's brave for me as a soldier, right? So you have to start thinking, okay, well now, what is brave as an educator is maybe to say, okay, like today I screwed up. I mean, which you can't screw up as a teacher, because especially for people, teachers who teach younger kids, like you will be on the news. You cannot have a bad day as a teacher, right? But like you have to think, okay, I screwed up today. Tomorrow we'll do it differently, right? So that's one type of courage, which is interesting for a teacher. That is defined by your role as a teacher. Now, there is, when you get to later Stoics like Epictetus, there are like times when perhaps he suggests that your roles may conflict. At least apparently, right? For Cicero working on Panaitius, if your roles are conflicting, you're doing something wrong, right? Because they shouldn't be conflicting. But by the time you get to the later Stoics, like they'll say, well, especially Epictetus is more of a religiously minded Stoic. He'll say, ask God. Like there's some kind of introspection involved where you just kind of pray about it, right? And I don't know what anybody's religious beliefs are, and I don't think it really matters because they're pantheists at the end of the day, right? But you say, okay, look, I can't figure it out from within these roles. I kind of have to look in one way outside of myself, but another way deep inside myself, right? And say, okay, well, just kind of in some sense pray about it and find out what the right thing to do is. I don't know what that means for everybody, but if that's one way to check any kind of role conflict. But the important point is that if like Ryan had to do and like I had to do, if you're going to define yourself as something other than a soldier, well, these are at least good things to start thinking about. Okay, well, what am I first and foremost? I mean, what is something I cannot help no matter what I do? I'm a rational human being, right? Until I die, I'm going to be a rational human being. And if I'm not a rational human, it's because there's no me there to be a rational human being. Right? Now, what is my own individual nature? Well, I always studied philosophy. I mean, even when I was a teenager, I was reading Plato. I mean, none of it made sense to me as a 14-year-old, but I was still reading it, right? And it's not till after I came back from the war where I started reading Plato again and started looking at Socrates, for example, like the grandfather of the Stoics, and thinking like, wow, this guy. People are reading him incorrectly. Like Socrates is a combat veteran. Like he's coming back. He's fought in Potidaea, Delium, Amphipolis, right? And he's coming back saying, you people are saying you know what justice is. You're sending young men to go fight and die in the war against the Spartans. You can't even define justice. Are you aware how ignorant you are? Because I know I'm ignorant. You are ignorant, and you're not aware that you're ignorant, which is dangerous, right? So once you start looking at it like that, and then you find yourself, okay, well, someone like me who was very interested in reading, very interested in philosophy, well, I'm going to go one way, not the other, right? If I had to go to work with Ryan, like I'd be done outside within a day of this, right? Like, please just pay me, don't even pay me what I work today because I didn't do much at all. Like I'm done, right? I'm out. But for me, it was about studying. Like the VA put me through my first my bachelor's, and I worked to put myself through my first master's and my second and my PhD. And for me, it was that I'm trying to convince Ryan to go study, and we can talk about that later on, because only the educated are free. No matter what people do to you, they cannot take away your education. They can only kill you, right? So there's always that. But some people are just going to be more studious than other people, right? And that was my own personal individual role. In a way it wouldn't have been someone else's. So you start looking at that, and people are going to have different paths. I can't tell other people what they should do. I can only tell you what the Stoics are saying. Look, only the educated are free. No one is ever out of your league, because people might be more popular. They might have more money. They might have a higher social class. They might be a different race than you or a different gender than you. But what they can never take away from you is your education. And if I could tell any returning soldier or returning service person that, is like, get an education. Because if not, someone will tell your story for you. And you don't want someone telling your story for you. You want to tell your own story. All right. But there's those roles. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, even just thinking about what Seneca said, how, your character, the virtue of your soul, is the great leveler. It brings everybody on the same playing field, because like you say, your career is not attached to your character. Like, your character is the one thing that's truly who you are, and you can develop that beyond anybody with money or assets or anything that you don't have externally. But okay, so this is a fascinating idea. So you're starting with fundamentals and saying, okay, I'm a human being, then I'm an individual, and then I'm oh my gosh, what was the third one? Sorry.
Circumstantial roles.
So yeah, then circumstances. How do I look at that? And then your career. I think it's a very interesting way, and it goes back to what Ryan was saying earlier as well about just recognizing that we are imperfect. We're going to make mistakes, and we need to learn how to come to terms with that. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but would you mind if we kind of go in a more current events sort of direction in the conversation now? Because I think having both of you here is, it would be a waste if I didn't pick your brains on what you think we're all seeing in the world at the moment. Because I've spoken to people like Joseph Siracusa, professional of international diplomacy, probably the wisest academic I've ever met, and he's the kind of guy who looks at these situations, takes a very broad view. And I've spoken to people who are working in the military-industrial complex in America in various positions, and getting their perspectives, and the perspectives vary a lot, because and I find that a lot of people take a very jolted perspective, and it's like they're either fully one way or they're fully the other way. It's like, no, we should definitely intervene immediately. We should do everything that we can to go over there and stop this, or hang on, maybe we shouldn't get into a global nuclear holocaust over a fight that is really just between Russia and Ukraine. There's all sorts of things to think about here. But seeing as we've got both of you here, I'd love to hear your perspectives. What's your reaction been as you've seen this war break out? And Leo, with your background in just war theory, I want to know how you think maybe Stoics would think about this. But I don't know, Ryan, do you want to jump in first?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll caveat everything I'm about to say, but by saying I'm not a foreign policy expert, and I'm not an expert on Russian affairs. And much like how you described, most of the people I'm speaking to about this, they are so one way or the other. And because of the distrust in the media these days, conspiracy theories are abound. So, from the people I talk to, it ranges from, we shouldn't get involved with anybody else's business. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect us, to, Ukraine is some sort of evil cabal that's laundering the world's elites' money, and we should go. It's just, it ranges all over the place. But like you said, people, they feel very strongly one way or another. Whereas, I'm not educated on the history of Ukraine and Russia. I will say that generally speaking, whenever I see residential compounds being shelled for what seems like a vanity project by Putin, I have a hard time thinking of any way that this project is justified. Even if the Ukrainian government is corrupt, to me, at least the fierce resistance being put up by the Ukrainians shows that as a sovereign people, they're not interested in having a Russian oligarch over them. But so that's my take on the situation in a nutshell. But in terms of the nature of the war and whether or not it's just and all that, I think Leo would be much better to speak to that.
Yeah, I would like to get you in here, Leo. What do you think?
Right. Well, I have to be even more careful than Ryan here, because this kind of is my field. So and this is an ever-changing situation, and I don't know, there are intelligence agencies that,
son.
Yeah, right. There are intelligence agencies just, work around the clock on this. So what can I say that isn't going to change, or that someone else doesn't know something else about, right? But because we're going to talk about Stoicism, I think that what's important here for our discussion is that the Stoics lived in a world where war was common, right? In the Hellenistic era, the Roman era, no one thought it was crazy that Marcus Aurelius could be a philosopher and also a soldier, the kind of person that will try to free a slave when he could, but also has no problem sending soldiers into a village to take prisoners of war when he has to, or putting somebody on a cross when he feels like he has to, right? That is not a contradiction in terms between Stoicism and the military. And I think it's very important, because so often we get a Stoic position that's like, well, in the Stoic view, there would just be no, they wouldn't be, why would we possibly go to war about anything, right? We're also cosmopolitan.
The
and that's just not the world
utopian
the Stoics
vision
lived
that
in.
will never come about.
Exactly. That's not the world the Stoics lived in, right? And I think that we start looking at the Stoics, I mean, we got to remember that Marcus Aurelius is someone who Machiavelli admired very much, right? So, and Machiavelli is saying something like, look, not all of us, okay, almost none of us can be Marcus Aurelius, that can be virtuous in every respect and also great soldiers. Because the rest of us cannot be Marcus Aurelius, we have to basically choose if we're going to be feared or loved. And it's always better to be feared, right? And he says, and this is, I think I'm going to tie this into Stoicism here, because love depends on obligation. But fear depends on your self-interest, and that never goes away. Obligation goes out the window as soon as your sense of self-preservation comes into play. But your fear depends on your self-preservation, and that never goes away. So it's always better to be feared, Machiavelli is saying. And yet, this is quite close, or at least analogous to the Stoic concept of oikeiosis, right? The Stoics understood that every living thing has this, nature kind of gives it this thing that is oikeiosis, that basically you seek out things which you take to be in your best interest. You perceive yourself, you perceive other things, and you take in those things that are conducive to your constitution, right? Now, for human beings, this has two aspects. For human beings particularly, this concept of our self-preservation, we want to take in things that are going to preserve ourselves, but also has a social aspect, right? And I mean, the Stoics didn't know about evolution the way we know about it, but I mean, we can understand that being the type of apes that we are, we had to watch each other's backs so the eagle wouldn't come take us and that'd be the end of our story, right? Or watch out for the that's why we have forward-facing eyes, or at least one reason. I'm simplifying here, but you get the idea. So once you understand this concept of oikeiosis, like you understand, like, okay, well, what is in your best interest? This is an answer to Jean-Paul Sartre's question of, existentialism and humanism. Well, should I go protect should I go take care of my sick mom, or should I go fight against the Nazis? Should I go fight in Ukraine for the Ukrainians, or should I stay here and take care of my family? And as Sartre knew, no one could really answer this but you. But the Stoics were saying, well, look, we have a path here. What is your oikeiosis, right? What is that which is in your self-interest? What is that which is in your social role? And once you understand that, once you start breaking this down into your social roles, you decide whether or not you're going to go fight somewhere. You decide or whether or not you're going to say, yeah, look, I could do that, or I could spend the same amount of time getting my mothers and my sisters and my kids to the border to protect them, right? No one can really answer that question for you. But once the Stoics say, like, okay, there's so much that's not in your control. Like, even if you think you're going to go fight and be a hero, well, you could just easily end up there. You could be taken as a prisoner of war on your first day. You could be like, there's all these things are out of your control. So much of being a hero, or what is perceived of a hero, is out of your control at the right place at the right time. Yeah, there's an internal aspect to it. I'm not taking that away from anybody. But how much of it is completely out of your control, just being at the right place at the right time, right? So once you understand this concept, and this is at what we call the lowest level of analysis, the first level of analysis of the individual. But there's a higher level, that of the nation state, right? What do you like? What I think the Stoic concept of oikeiosis does so well is, like what the philosophical school of international relations, known as political realism, it teaches empathy. Like, put yourself in this actor's role and watch this encirclement. What do you do about it, right? And I'm not saying Putin's right on this. That's what I'm saying. But if we can say anything, it's something about, like, okay, well, when do we check our rivals? Do we check them in Poland? Do we check them in East Germany? Do we check them in Moscow? Where do we check them? And once you understand that, you realize, well, let me put myself in this other actor's situation, right? In this other actor's circumstance. What is this person's oikeiosis? What is this nation state's oikeiosis, right? If I can abstract this concept to a higher level, right? And I think the Stoics do very well in this, and still accept, yeah, oh, you know what? There's going to be wars, and they're going to be brutal. But I don't control so much of that. What I control is my own progression, right? My own actions, to the extent that I control anything at all. I control my own intentions about what I'm doing. So we can look at this like in a sense like, okay, what would a good soldier do? But it's also like, okay, but what would I do if I'm going to be a good soldier? Right? What is my role in all this? And if you look at the Eastern Europe particularly, I mean, these two nations have so much history together, right? It's not like us, like Ryan going to Afghanistan in this sense, or me going to Iraq. This is people that, you know, at least from what I'm told about from Russians themselves, 70% of their respective languages are mutually intelligible, right? So there's so much history together that once you, it lends itself to a nuance, to a very nuanced view, rather than yes we should, or no we shouldn't, or Putin is always wrong no matter what, or Ukraine is always wrong no matter what, right? Once you understand the Stoic view, you're like, okay, I don't control any of this. What I control is my own progression towards courage or towards justice in this war, whatever your role may be. And once you understand that, you realize that there is a sense of cosmopolitanism even among the people in the bloodiest wars. I mean, you can find that as far back as Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, even if they didn't always follow the lessons that they were thinking about and teaching, particularly Seneca, starting a war with Britain, right? Over calling in the loans that he himself put out there, right? But they're at least on their best day, you can admire what they're saying about oikeiosis, about our obligations to each other, just by virtue of them being human beings, right?
Can I ask a question?
Jump in, yeah.
Okay, so this is something that I thought about recently in political conversations with my friends, and one in particular, the one who has pretty isolationist views, is, you know, they should just do whatever's best for them. And to a degree, I'm hearing that in your role, you know, if you're in the role of a leader of a country, but hypothetically, because I don't know enough about Russia, let's just assume that in this imaginary scenario, Putin is a dictator and there is no influence on him. Whatever he does is for what he thinks is in the best interest of him and his cronies. In that situation, are you able, from a Stoic perspective, to draw a line and say, well, that's unjust if he's not acting on behalf of his people for the betterment of his people as a whole, as opposed to just a rich few?
Right. So let me try to look at it as what the Stoics would necessarily have to say about it, right? They would say, of course, he's being unjust. Everyone there is being unjust. Everyone fighting this war is being unjust. Why? Because none of them are sages, right? And if you're not a sage, you're acting unjustly, you're acting cowardly, you're acting imprudently, and you're acting without self-control. Like, necessarily. Of course, some people are progressing, some people aren't, right? That's the whole point of Stoicism. It's not what do we need Stoicism for? But certainly they're acting unjustly, right? So the question becomes, well, what is your social role in other people's injustice? Right? Are you an only child where if you go, who's going to take care of your elderly parents? Or do you have 15 brothers and sisters that could do it, and you being a former ranger like you, and then you say, well, I got 15 brothers to take care of my parents, I can go do this. But so much is something that the Stoics cannot say. The Stoic position on fighting in Ukraine is this, right? No, like, you have to see what your social roles are. Like, it's so hard to explain this for me. Maybe if I failed, full disclosure, I failed geometry my first time, but I imagine it like a pyramid. Like, there's a human role, and then on top of that, there's just the individual role, then the circumstantial role, and then the career role. And they have to kind of match up. They match up for different people in different ways, right? But they necessarily cannot conflict, or else you're doing it wrong, at least if you're Panaitius and Cicero, right? So to not answer your question, but to do the best I can, is I don't know. But the Stoics would say, like, look, whether somebody might be going to fight in the war, and they'd be doing it appropriately, and someone else would be going to fight the war, and they'd be doing it inappropriately. They would say,
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if I was clear in my question. So I'm talking about leadership, not individual soldier, because I'm all on board with what you're saying. I absolutely agree with that. And let me rephrase and get away from virtuous and use the word appropriate. Is it appropriate for a dictator to act in his own self-interest as opposed to in terms of the interest of his people?
Got it.
Generally speaking.
Right. Yes. So the bottom line would be no, of course not, right? For the Stoics, there's no, okay, so as like the Stoics are saying, especially the late Stoics, when you put anything else besides virtue on this side of the scale, you screwed up, right? So the analogy here is the two puppies. Yeah, they play, they get along, but throw a piece of meat between them, and you'll see how they start fighting, right? Or like you start seeing the wrestler who will not be taken down at all, but he gets thrown by the glance of a pretty girl, right? Or something like this. So you get the impression that when you have anything else other than virtue on this side of the scale, you're wrong. Even if it's glory, even if it's your empathy towards somebody else, you're wrong. Because the whole thing should be putting, okay, what is on this side of the scale is my own virtue. Now, fortunately, the Stoics think your own self-interest, involves being virtuous. That is what your self-interest is. But when you think anything else is in your self-interest, other than that, that's when you will do whatever it takes to get it. For example, if it's in your interest to have a cloak, it's in your interest to steal it from the baths, right? Like, for example, I take my bike over to the park so I can take my bike there, and then I park it there and go jogging, and somebody stole it, right? So the question is, should I be mad at the thief? Well, the thief is doing what the thief thinks is best, right? It's in his interest to have a bike, so it's in his interest to cut the cable and take mine, right? So I shouldn't be mad at the thief. Like Epictetus says, when you blame other people, that's a sign of a fool. When you blame yourself, now you're making progress, right? I shouldn't have parked it 10 times in the same place. Somebody's been watching me and then brought cable cutters, and I'm the idiot that didn't notice, right? So to answer your question, or at least I think to get closer to your question, is no, the dictator is always going to be wrong by virtue of being a dictator, because they're putting something other than virtue on this side of the scale. And once you do that, it becomes just mere self-interest, right? To the sense that you're doing something justly. Now, the Stoics didn't have anything wrong to say about monarchy per se, right? And there's a sense in which they thought it was easier to whisper in a king's ear than to talk to a republic, where there's a million people and 2 million opinions, right? So the Stoics didn't think anything was wrong with monarchy as such, right? They thought all these things were indifferent. But when anybody, whether it be a democracy or a monarchy or a republic, starts putting anything else besides virtue, then you're screwing up. What should be there first is virtue. So if you look at a ruler, right? Let's take from my dissertation, King Leonidas of Sparta, who was educated by the Stoics Pharos. What was he like? Well, he was an autocrat, right? Killing oligarchs that were running the city, right? Exiling a bunch of people. He had to break some eggs, and he broke quite a few eggs. But can we salvage this? Well, what was this person's character like? Were they progressing towards justice, towards courage? I can't answer that question. I can't get in somebody else's head, but that's what the Stoics are saying. Well, I don't know. Find out who this person is. What do they put on this side of the scale? And then we can talk about whether it's good or bad. Epictetus at one point says, someone comes up to him and says, "How do I get my brother to stop being angry at me?" Well, bring your brother here. I'll talk to him about your brother's anger. I have nothing to say to you, right? What I have to say to you is, being the best brother possible, putting virtue on your side of the scale. So when it comes to an autocrat, by your definition, if he's a dictator, yes, by virtue, then tyrants are always wrong, because tyrants put something other than virtue on this side of the scale. But autocrats in themselves are not necessarily evil by virtue of being autocrats, the Stoics are going to tell us. I mean, you had Stoics that worked for kings, certainly. Worked for Cleomenes, worked for some of the Macedonian kings. So there's nothing wrong with being an autocrat as such. For the Stoics, there is something wrong with being a tyrant, or we might call a dictator as such, right? I don't know if it probably didn't help, but that's the only answer I got. Okay.
Can I maybe clarify a couple of things? Because I think I'm trying to get a picture of what you're saying here. What I want to say to everybody who's here in the chat as well and in the Zoom call, if you have any questions, now's the time to raise your hand in the Zoom buttons down here, and we're going to get into a Q&A section in just a couple of minutes. But so Leah, it sounds to me like almost like, so you're taking a very individualist perspective that nonetheless aims at the good of the whole, right? And the idea, to me, it seems as though the idea is, well, if you took a utopian vision sort of perspective to start with and say, okay, what would be the ideal state? Well, perhaps it would be where everybody is focusing on how they can individually contribute in the best possible way based on being a human being, based on having their individual nature, the circumstances in front of them, and their career. So how can they individually create? And you kind of think, okay, how good could everything get if everybody was focused on that single aim of like, how can I fully utilize the gifts and talents and personality that I have for the benefit of the whole? And so it sounds to me like it's not as individualistic as it at first appears. It's actually something that there's like these layers and layers and layers of analysis that you could give, and you could perhaps say that, okay, well, the person who decided to go to war, let's say it's the king, they called the war. Perhaps they called the war for unjust reasons. And therefore, you might suggest that the war is blended with injustice, which means that the war as a whole is perhaps not a virtuous endeavor. But nonetheless, there could be many, many soldiers who are fighting in that war who are doing it justly, and they're doing it for the right reasons. And therefore, it's not as simple just to say, well, the whole war's bad and all the soldiers who are fighting are bad and it's a terrible thing. No, it's so complicated, because then you start to see that every individual has the. Am I getting it right here? Am I on the right track?
Yeah, that's actually the converse as to what I discussed in my project. Is I was looking at something like Sherman's burning of Atlanta, right? So I just, for now, I'm going to assume Sherman was a sage, which he definitely was not. His racism alone keeps him from that, right? But he can give a just order, like, okay, if we don't destroy Atlanta, then we'll have to fight. We'll be bogged down here instead of going where we need to be going, right? And the Union needs to win. So he could say, okay, I need you to go in there and I need to destroy Atlanta. Let the people leave. Let women and children leave. Do what you have to do, but do it justly. But the soldiers could be doing it unjustly, and you did have soldiers doing unjustly, looting, right? Destroying things that shouldn't be, stealing, right? Not just commandeering. You commandeer for the military or for others. You steal for you, right? You never ever steal, but you can commandeer. But when you're given an order to commandeer and you steal instead, now you're wrong, right? So you can give an order justly, and it can be followed unjustly. You can give an unjust order. I mean, like you say, assume for the sake of argument that the Iraq War was unjust, right? Assume, right? And by unjust, I mean it was an order given unjustly. Because remember, the only thing that can be unjust in Stoicism is not institutions, it's intentions, it's people's actions. Those are the things we talk about. When we talk about justice, the Stoics would find things like an institution being just. It would be like a category error. A person can be just, right? Yeah, so for the Stoics. Right, exactly. So something can be an unjust order, but a soldier can follow it justly, in the sense that, like, okay, do I have good reasons to not believe this? Well, no. So all things being equal, I'm going to do it this way until I have good reasons to believe it, right? Knowing what I know now. And this is always amenable to reason, and you should always be reasoning. And yet you could have the situation in which, well, I didn't have that information at the time. And until I have that information, well, I'm going to do the duty of a human being first, and then a soldier second, right?
Yeah, interesting. So that's kind of like that converse example of what I was giving there, where there are all these different layers. But I think it's vital what you're saying, that it's a category error. It's like I said, it's an issue in grammar, bad grammar. I think I heard Alan Watts said that once, and it's funny how a lot of this comes down to, do we know that? And you mentioned this earlier. Do we know the definitions of these words? I think that's something that I often think in our modern times. Like, when was the last time you heard any politician talk about wisdom? Like, when was the last time you heard any politician talk about virtue? Never. It's never on the table. And even if they did, would they know what it means? And so, listen, Leo and Ryan, this has been such a great conversation so far. We're going to open it up to some Q&A here. But I guess I just want to thank you both for being here, and Ryan, perhaps again the guest of the hour here. I want to ask you if you just want to tell everybody who's listening how they can, find your work, and maybe any message that you want to give to fellow Stoics and military members out there. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. If you want to reach out to me for anything, you have questions about this or what I'm doing, or know anybody that is actively involved in the same sort of thing, you can reach me at stoicwarfighters@gmail.com. In terms of telling people, you could find my podcast anywhere there are podcasts. I don't make any money on it. If anything, I'm losing money. But so this isn't me trying to profit from this. I just really think that Stoicism has a lot to offer in all the ways that it's marketed, in terms of helping you throughout your daily life, helping you with job performance, especially in high stress environments. But much more than that, it can create a bulwark, a framework to move through stressful environments that I haven't seen before. And it offers a very complex and nuanced understanding of why you're doing these things, instead of just giving you a tool for how to do them.
I love it, man. And thank you so much for doing what you're doing. It's always great to see people going out there and spreading, what they believe to be helpful philosophy. And I have one more question. Has Leo convinced you to go to university yet? Or is he still working on that?
Man,
and if so, what do you reckon you're going to study?
Well, I was close to pulling the trigger. I was talking to a university that has a fully online philosophy degree, because I have all the VA assets too, in terms of going to school for free. But my wife put the kibosh on that in a heartbeat. She's like, "Do you know how much you work? And now you want to take even more time away from me and the kids to go do a full course load after work?" And so after thinking about it, thinking really hard on it, because Leo did, really push me in that direction, or at least got me thinking about it. I'm not going to say you pushed me too hard. It's not appropriate for my roles right now to pursue that.
So,
but I'm doing everything I can.
Leo is writing an email to your wife, and
yeah. I'm doing what I can, insofar as my interest in philosophy is in improving my soul, my character, being a better person. And I think that if I devote a large amount of my free time to that endeavor, I'm not necessarily going to get more of that from going to university, at least not right now in the roles I'm in in this moment.
Yeah. And if I could add something to that, Ryan, if you've got a career, and if you've just got time on the side to be dedicated to your own personal study, it's there's that great quote, somebody said, I never let my education interfere with my learning. I've even found going to university that it's really difficult, especially if you want to explore particular directions. They're going to squeeze you into one line. They say, no, do this. And if you've got your own interests that you're exploring right now, perhaps you're going to get actually more benefit by going off and following your interests and saying, because I'm struggling at university because I want to explore this and this and this, and no, do this. And it's especially for a creative person, it's difficult. But I don't know. I think no matter what you do, you'll find your way to the kind of knowledge that you need, and that's going to help people through your podcast as well. So just keep it going, man. I'm a fan of what you're doing, and thank you for coming on today. You've been listening to the Walled Garden Podcast. If you'd like to attend any of our free meetups and events, or if you'd like to get one-on-one mentoring with either Sharon LaBelle, Kai Whiting, or myself, just go to thewalledgarden.com. But for now, don't forget to nourish those gardens in your mind.